The Russian armed forces likely incurred on the order of 100,000 irreversible personnel losses in Ukraine when we combine those confirmed killed in action with those missing in action who in this battle space overwhelmingly do not return. This is not a shock phrase. It is the sober synthesis of multiple streams of evidence and observable battlefield trends that converge on the same order of magnitude. Let me set the timeline. We are talking about the first half of 2025. During this period, Russia pursued continuous offensive pressure along numerous axes. These were not limited, decisive blows designed to unhinge a front. They were broad, grinding pushes that exacted steep costs. That operational choice matters. It means the casualty ledger grows even when the map barely moves. Now, a word on categories. In most modern wars, missing in action is a fluid status. In this war, given the prevalence of drones, precision fires, and contested recovery, MIA too often resolves into KIAs that were never recovered. We do not assume that. We observe it through patterns. Bodies left in kill zones, repeated Russian attempts at retrieval interdicted by loitering munitions, and extended periods where units report men as missing with no subsequent prisoner exchanges or verified returns. For the purpose of understanding combat effectiveness and demographic impact, KIA plus MIA is the appropriate proxy for irreversible. What makes this claim credible is not a single spreadsheet. It is the overlap between different analytic lenses. Independent tallies that track obituaries and probate records show a steady upward slope. Operational reporting highlights an abnormal wounded-to-killed ratio, often around 1 to 1.3, consistent with a drone-dominated environment where evacuation is dangerous and slow. Open-source geospatial analysis shows small territorial gains purchased at disproportionate human cost. Estimates differ in detail, but they rhyme in scale. When multiple imperfect instruments all point to the same bearing, a prudent staff officer trusts the bearing. Why is the ratio so grim? Drones compress the timeline from detection to lethality. They also extend lethality into phases that used to be survivable: casualty evacuation, resupply, rotation, even short-halt rest. A soldier who would have previously lived long enough to reach a medic now dies under observation and repeat strike. That shifts the math. It doesn't take ideological bias to see it. It takes a map, a log of strikes, and a casualty chain that breaks at the first link. Another framing point. Post-1945 Russian and Soviet military history offers no peacetime precedent for these 6-month figures. Chechnya, Afghanistan, Syria, none produced sustained monthly fatality bands on this level for this long with this density of small unit assaults. In 2025, the Russian military is attempting simultaneous pressure across sectors, with depleted artillery, degraded counter-UAS coverage, and an influx of minimally trained replacements. That combination reliably generates bodies without breakthroughs. We should also be honest about uncertainty. No one in this business has pristine real-time totals. The question is not whether there is noise. The question is whether the central tendency is robust. In this case, it is. The signal, irrespective of which dataset you prefer, is steep, persistent loss. To deny that requires ignoring video evidence of failed assaults, the self-reporting of Russian commanders and bloggers about unit attrition, and the simple arithmetic of sectors attacked versus ground gained. Start with the obituary and probate stream. This is slow but hard to fake at scale. Local death notices, inheritance registries, memorial posts, and cemetery records form a lagging but grounded signal. Analysts aggregate thousands of micro-confirmations, deduplicate names, and map units and dates where possible. Yes, there's undercount, families hide service, regional censorship
exists, and lags can stretch for months, but the slope matters more than the absolute. The curve steepens into 2025, consistent with the 6-month surge we're describing. Second, the battlefield forensics stream. Here, we fuse geolocated combat footage, drone strike logs, and satellite change detection. The key markers are repetitive small unit assaults, limited armor massing, and a high incidence of failed extractions under drone observation. We count knocked out vehicles, destroyed infantry carriers, and nearby KIA indicators, bodies not recovered, distinctive thermal signatures post-strike, and recurring patterns on the same microterrain. When you layer this against the operational tempo Russia sustains across several axes, the human cost implied by these contact rates is unmistakable. Third, external estimates. Methodologically transparent outlets, those that publish ranges and explain error bars, converge on a monthly KIA band that, when extrapolated across January-June 2025, lands in the same order of magnitude we assert. Some are higher, some lower. But when independent teams using different inputs, registry harvesting, battlefield footage, unit-level rosters, even capture-recapture techniques, start to rhyme, you treat that rhyme as signal. A critical cross-check is the wounded-to-killed ratio. In modern combined arms warfare with robust evacuation, you expect multiple wounded per KIA. What we observe instead is an anemic ratio, near 1 to 1.3 in many samples, compatible with the drone-saturated reality of 2025. Detection is rapid, strike is cheap, and medevac corridors are exposed. This abnormal ratio is not a rhetorical flourish, it's a diagnostic. It tells us that a larger fraction of those hit die before care, pulling total irreversibles upward, even if wounded plus killed totals look superficially similar year on year. We also run denominator checks. Russia's reported territorial gains in the first half of 2025 are limited in square kilometers relative to the number of assaults documented. If you compute a casualty cost per square kilometer using conservative assumptions, you end up in the same ballpark as the composite casualty figure. Equipment loss metrics reinforce that picture. Irrecoverable vehicle write-offs and repairables track with high-intensity contact and human attrition. Bias and deception are addressed up front. Could Russia's numbers be massaged? Of course. Could Kiev-sourced leaks emphasize a worst case? Also possible. That is why we avoid anchoring on a single leak and instead pressure test across streams with different failure modes. If Russian public obituaries are suppressed, they cannot simultaneously create excess cemetery growth and probate spikes. If a leaked ledger is inflated, it should still be falsifiable against unit-level rosters, rotation gaps, and visible order of battle thinning on specific axes. So far, those falsifiers don't appear. To understand why Russian losses spiked to record levels, we have to move past slogans and look at how the war is actually being fought, day by day, task by task. The pattern is consistent. A strategy of pressure without decisive concentration, layered over a tactical environment dominated by drones, and executed by formations that are chronically short on planning time, protected mobility, and reliable evacuation. Start with strategy. Moscow has chosen breadth over focus, simultaneous offensive pressure across multiple axes. In theory, this stretches Ukrainian reserves. In practice, it dilutes its own mass, fires, and engineering support. Without the density required to achieve local overmatch, attacks register as friction, not breakthroughs. You get high contact rates with modest map movement. That is the perfect recipe for steady attrition. Now the tactical layer. The modern front line is a surveillance grid. Small quadcopters,
FPV drones see and strike faster than staffs can cycle orders. Every linear meter that used to be dead ground is now observed. Every choke point can be pre-registered for loitering munitions. When infantry push in squad-sized packets, often 4 to 12 men, those packets are detected, fixed, and struck before they can consolidate. If they do seize a trench line, they inherit a kill box where resupply and rotation are targeted as predictably as the assault itself. Artillery was once the shield for infantry. Today, it is an intermittent umbrella. Russian tube and rocket artillery have been thinned by counter-battery fire, ammunition constraints, and the need to conceal positions from drones. That forces batteries to shoot short, relocate, and accept longer dark periods. The effect at the point of contact is stark. Fewer minutes of suppression, thinner smoke, and too little counter-drone cover during the approach.
When suppression is light and smoke is sporadic, infantry die in the open. Engineering shortfalls compound the problem. Breaching is a choreography. Reduce obstacles, cut lanes, mark lanes, secure shoulders, and push protected mobility through while fires suppress and smoke screens. In many Russian assaults, that choreography breaks. Minefield reduction is partial, lane marking is inconsistent. Assault elements drift into uncleared ground and trigger cascades of detonations and drone drops. Without reliable armored breaching and mine plows under umbrella fires, infantry revert to crawl and pray tactics across prepared belts. Staff work is the quiet killer here. This is a war of many small attacks rather than a few large ones. That means battalion and brigade staffs must plan, deconflict, and support dozens of micro-operations per day. ISR tasking, route management, medical evacuation windows, counter-battery timing, counter-UAS coverage, demining schedules, and logistics pulses. When staffs are underexperienced and turnover is high, planning collapses into templated friction. Same routes, same timings, same signatures. The enemy learns and punishes the repetition. Evacuation completes the attrition loop. In prior wars, a wounded soldier often had minutes to hours of survivability if evacuation corridors were sheltered. Here, medevac itself is targeted. Drones hover over casualty points, track buddy carries, and strike ad hoc aid posts. The result is a wounded-to-killed ratio far below historical norms. Men who would have lived with timely extraction bleed out or are finished by follow-on FPV hits. That single fact accelerates irreversible losses even when total hit counts do not skyrocket. Force quality matters too. Russia is backfilling units with short-trained contract recruits, older reservists, and penal contingents. That affects everything: small unit leadership, fire discipline, night movement, camouflaging SOPs, radio procedure, and the improvisational skill needed when plans break. In drone country, the side that adapts minute to minute survives. Undertrained troops tend to bunch, pause in exposed micro-terrain, and communicate on predictable nets. Behavior patterns drones exploit mercilessly.
Electronic warfare and counter-UAS are the last major variable. Effective EW requires coverage and agility. Detect, jam, spoof, and attrit at the edge. Russian sectors show uneven EW density. Gaps appear exactly where small units needed most, during the 300 to 1,000 meters of the final approach and during the first 24 hours of consolidation. Where EW is thin, every logistic act, water resupply, battery delivery, ammunition carry, becomes a strike opportunity for the defender. Put it together and the mechanism of loss is clear. Breadth without decisive mass creates constant contact. Drones convert contact into lethality at every phase: approach, assault, consolidation, and evacuation. Thinned artillery and broken breaching elevate exposure. Weak staff work multiplies predictable patterns. Low force quality magnifies every mistake. Compromised medevac hardens wounds into deaths. None of these factors alone explains record losses. Together, they guarantee them, especially when repeated day after day across multiple sectors with no operational pause to reset training, rotate cadres, rebuild artillery stocks, and recalibrate tactics. That is why the casualty curve rises even when the front line barely shifts. It is not a mystery. It is the arithmetic of modern observation strike warfare applied to an army conducting many small, under-supported assaults in drone-saturated airspace. Let's take the discussion out of abstraction and into the dirt. Named units, named villages, specific patches of ground, and quantify the price paid for marginal gains. Start with a regiment-level lens. The 1194th Motor Rifle Regiment entered combat in the summer of 2023 around Bakhmut, and subsequently cycled through sectors that include Bilohorovka, Andriivka, and Ozaryanovka. None of those places are sprawling cities. Andriivka was built
a two-street village with a pre-war population measured in dozens, not thousands. Yet over roughly 2 years, the regiment's ledger shows a brutal arithmetic. At least 592 killed, 297 missing, and 1,226 wounded. Officer attrition is visible in the roll call. Company and battalion commanders killed or wounded, an indicator that leadership density at the point of contact is thinning. What did that buy? On the map, precious little. A contested tree line here, a trench spur there, and a constant churn in the same microterrain. The microterrain matters. The ground between Andriivka and Ozaryanivka is a checkerboard of tree lines, ravines, and field margins that are perfect drone country. Assault groups move in packets, get detected as they exit cover, and are bracketed by FPV strikes as they try to cross the last 200 to 500 meters. Even successful seizures of a trench have a half-life measured in hours if resupply, rotation, and consolidation are not protected. The 1194th's casualty mix, high killed and missing relative to wounded, tracks with that pattern. Recovery is hard, evacuation is lethal, and men who would have survived in a different era are written off as irreversible losses. Scale up to formation level. The 18th Army's cumulative losses since its commitment include thousands of killed, with an unusually heavy officer slice, colonels, lieutenant colonels, majors, and a long tail of company-grade leaders and NCOs. That officer skew is operationally significant. Armies can replace bodies faster than they regenerate leadership. When a brigade loses multiple company commanders and senior sergeants, the next rotation inherits degraded small unit initiative and thinner staff competence, exactly the two ingredients you need for drone-era survivability. Now the map math. In the first 8 months of 2025, Russia's reported territorial gain is on the order of 2,860 square kilometers. If we apply conservative casualty composites for the same period, killed, missing, and wounded, we arrive at a cost per square kilometer near 98 personnel, roughly 30 killed, 12 missing, and 56 wounded per kilometer squared taken. This is not a rhetorical device. It's a sanity check that ties human loss to ground gained. A square kilometer is a box 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. You can walk its perimeter in under an hour. Paying 30 irrecoverable lives for each box before you count the equipment write-offs is a stark exchange rate in a war of limited operational payoff. Equipment losses reinforce the human picture. Across those same months, irrecoverable vehicle write-offs and the large pool of repairables track with a battlefield where armor is routinely attrited at the approaches and where recovery vehicles themselves are drone targets. When breaching assets and infantry carriers go down, infantry revert to foot movement through mined belts and pre-registered kill zones, which in turn raises personnel losses. The correlation is not perfect, but it is persistent. Where the vehicle curve kinks upward, the casualty curve follows.
Russian commanders and mill bloggers have publicly acknowledged battalions reduced to company strength after short tours, assault companies losing half their men in a week, and special-purpose detachments tallying 4-figure losses over a single operational episode. These are not opposition talking points. They're self-reports from the ecosystem that has the strongest incentive to downplay failure. When the most favorable narrators concede staggering attrition, you should believe the floor is high. It's also useful to ask what would falsify the high-cost, low-gain thesis. If assaults were achieving local operational rupture, bridges across major rivers, encirclements of brigade-sized groupings, rapid roll-ups of defensive belts, we would expect casualty density to be front-loaded, but offset by depth of exploitation. We don't see that. Instead, gains are incremental and repeatedly contested, with defenders re-entering the same grid squares that attackers bled to take days earlier. That is the signature of attrition without decisive effect. Finally, the case studies generalize because they rhyme across sectors. Whether you look at Donetsk's urban outskirts, the woodlots west of Bakhmut, or the open fields in Zaporizhia, the mechanism is the same. Small assault packets under drone surveillance, partial suppression from thinned artillery, piecemeal breaching,
predictable logistics pulses, and evacuation interdicted by cheap precision. Units like the 1194th are not outliers. They are exemplars of a system producing the same outcome across the front. So when we cite approximately 98 personnel per square kilometer and hold up regimental and army-level ledgers, it's not to shock. It's to ground the conversation in measurable reality. The field cases say the same thing the big picture metrics say. The current Russian approach buys small boxes of ground at a catastrophic price.
And the price is rising as drones squeeze every phase of the fight, from the first bound to the last attempt at medical evacuation. What these casualty figures do to a force is cumulative, structural, and hard to reverse in the near term. Combat effectiveness is not a single gauge you can tap back into the green. It's an ecosystem. As officers and senior NCOs are killed or taken out of action, the leadership lattice that holds small units together thins. The squads that used to move on initiative begin to move by habit. Fire discipline loosens. Camouflage and radio procedure degrade under stress. Protected mobility, already scarce, becomes episodic as armored carriers and breaching kits attrit faster than they can be replaced, which pushes more infantry into open ground and mined belts. Artillery, once the rhythm section of Russian assaults, fires in shorter windows, then goes dark to avoid counter-battery and drones. Medevac runs, which used to be routine, are now calculated risks under a hovering camera. None of this kills an army outright. All of it drags the ceiling lower for what that army can accomplish at a sustainable tempo. It takes seasons, not weeks, to grow a dependable squad leader and years to produce a company-grade officer who can choreograph an assault under drone surveillance while juggling ISR, smoke, breaching, and timings for counter-battery. That is the bottleneck Russia faces. Replacements arrive, but the behavioral signatures of inexperience, bunching on the move, pausing on exposed micro-terrain, cycling predictable routes, keying mics on the same nets, invite strikes. When veterans are wounded or killed, the informal knowledge that used to keep a platoon alive dissipates. You can see it on the ground. Plans that look tidy in a briefing melt into repetitions that defenders have already mapped and pre-registered. The equipment ledger amplifies this slide. Vehicles written off irretrievably remove the very tools that flatten casualty curves. Mine plows, rollers, bridging assets, armored carriers that carry infantry through the worst 100 meters. Even the so-called repairables have a cost, because recovery vehicles are prime drone targets, and every recovery evolution exposes crews and route nodes. When those assets are missing from the plan, commanders default to what is available. And what is available is often men on foot under a thin artillery umbrella, moving by dead reckoning through belts that were designed to punish exactly that profile.
Sustained attrition also rewires behavior. Units cut tours shorter where they can and rotate faster, which slows the hardening of small unit chemistry. Scarce enablers, mobile EW sets, night optics, thermal decoys are hoarded, traded, and sometimes misplaced as informal economies emerge. Assault groups tilt toward the most risk-tolerant soldiers, while average competence drifts downward as experienced fighters are lost. Morale does not collapse in a cinematic instant. It erodes into coping mechanisms, tighter circles of trust, unauthorized pauses, a reluctance to expend precious drones on anything but sure kills. These are the tells of a force surviving the day rather than shaping the week. Projecting forward, the base case remains a grind. Incremental advances purchased at a rising, irreversible cost. Assault cadence stays high, artillery density remains uneven, counter-UAS improves in places, but not in a way that transforms the edge of the fight where squads actually die. Under that trajectory, the cumulative toll by year's end plausibly climbs into the upper bands suggested by the first half of 2025, even if the broader wounded plus killed sum looks superficially similar to the year prior. A better outcome for Moscow would require synchronized movement on several fronts at once: denser mobile electronic warfare at the point of contact, a restoration of protected mobility and disciplined breaching under smoke and suppression, and a training reset that reteaches squads to move at night, mask their signatures, and act on decentralized cues. If those pieces click, you would expect the wounded-to-killed ratio to drift back toward historical norms, and for vehicle losses to decouple from assault counts, signaling real gains in survival and tempo. The worst outcome is also clear: a broader replenishment of headcount without a corresponding lift in training and leadership, which would swell battalions on paper, while locking them into the same small packet assaults with the same lethal signatures and the same kill chains. The proof points that will confirm or falsify this outlook are already visible to anyone watching closely. If evacuation improves and the ratio of wounded to killed moves decisively upward, if EW jamming shows up consistently in the last kilometer where it matters, if breaching kits reappear in assault footage and stay on station long enough to matter, if officers
obituaries thin out and recovery crews start to survive their runs, then the curve is bending. If instead the map continues to move by grids while the videos keep showing foot-borne groups bleeding through the same gaps, you can assume the system is paying the same bill for the same ground. In the end, Moscow's strategic choice set is narrow. It can pause on secondary axes, rebuild stocks, concentrate EW, breaching, and fires, and buy depth at fewer points of attack, or it can keep pressing broadly and accept a casualty bill that outpaces the regeneration of competence. One path trades time for survivability, the other trades people for squares. In a drone-saturated war, that distinction is not academic. It is the difference between an army that can still move a line and one that can bend it.